Welcome, dear traveler, to Dream Atlas. Find a place of quiet comfort. Let your body settle. Let your limbs grow heavy and warm. Take a slow, deep breath in. And as you exhale, release the day. Let go of all the thoughts, the worries, the plans, and let them drift away like clouds across a vast twilight sky. Breathe in again, feeling the cool air enter. And as you breathe out, feel a wave of relaxation wash over you. From the tips of your toes, up through your legs, soothing your back, softening your shoulders, and calming your mind. You are safe here. You are at peace. Tonight, we do not travel to a land of dreams, but to a time of myths, a time when gods walked among mortals, when monsters lurked in the deep, and when heroes were forged in the fires of impossible trials. We are going to sail across the wine-dark sea of the ancient world, guided by the stars of a forgotten age. Our story is one of longing, of cleverness, of courage, and of the unshakable desire to find one's way home. It is the story of the great Odysseus, king of Ithaca, and his cursed 10-year voyage back from the Trojan War. So close your eyes, listen to the sound of the gentle waves, and let us begin. The great city of Troy had fallen. 10 years of bitter war were over. Its fires extinguished, its heroes either buried or finally turning their ships towards home. Among them was Odysseus, the clever king, the architect of the victory with his Trojan horse. His heart ached for his island kingdom of Ithaca, for his wise and faithful wife Penelope, and for his son Telemachus, whom he had left as just an infant. The winds were fair, the sea was calm. The journey should have been short, but the fates and the gods had other plans. Their first stop after Troy was the land of the Ciconies. Flushed with victory and pride, Odysseus and his men sacked the city, taking what they wanted. Odysseus urged them to leave quickly, to not tempt fate, but his men were deafened by celebration. They feasted on the shore, drinking wine and making merry, unaware that survivors had fled inland, gathering reinforcements. At dawn, they came. Not with a battle cry, but like the morning mist rolling over the fields. Silent, and then suddenly everywhere. The battle on the beach was chaos. The groggy, unprepared men of Odysseus were overwhelmed. They fought bravely, but were forced back to their ships, carrying their wounded and mourning their dead. With heavy hearts, they pushed off from the shore, leaving 6 men from each ship behind. It was their first taste of tragedy, a bitter lesson in the cost of pride. A storm sent by a displeased Zeus then raged for days, tearing their sails and pushing them far off course into unknown waters. When the storm finally broke, they found themselves near a strange and tranquil shore, the land of the lotus eaters. The air here was warm and sweet, heavy with the scent of honey and flowers. The people who greeted them were gentle and welcoming, with peaceful smiles and dreamy eyes. They offered Odysseus's scouts their most cherished food, the lotus flower. It was delicious, intoxicatingly sweet, and as the men ate, a blissful calm washed over them. Their memories of the bloody war, the pain of their lost comrades, the fierce longing for home, all of it began to melt away. Why would they ever want to leave this perfect peace? The desire to continue their journey vanished, replaced by a simple, serene wish to stay forever, eating the honeyed fruit in the warm sun. Odysseus, waiting at the ships, grew worried. When he went ashore and saw his men, their eyes vacant with contentment, he knew he was facing a danger more subtle than any sword. He had to drag them back to the ships by force, these weeping, protesting men, and tie them to the rowing benches. He ordered the others to set sail immediately, before they too could fall under the flower's gentle, soul-stealing spell. As the island faded into the distance, so did the lotus's magic, and the men awoke from their dream, their hearts once again filled with the painful, necessary ache for home. Discovery was a different kind of island, lush and green, but eerily wild. An island of giants, the Cyclopes. Here, each one-eyed giant lived for himself, in a cave, without laws or society. Driven by curiosity and a need for supplies, Odysseus took 12 of his best men and a wineskin of his strongest, most potent wine, and set off to explore. They found a cave, vast and imposing. Inside, racks of cheese were aging, and pens were filled with lambs and kids. The owner was not home. His men urged him to take the cheese and lambs and leave. But Odysseus's curiosity, his desire to see the giant and receive a host's gift, made him stay. It was a fateful decision. Suddenly, the ground trembled. The entrance to the cave was darkened by a monstrous shadow. Polyphemus, the son of the sea god Poseidon, had returned. He was a terrifying mountain of a man, with a single glaring eye in the center of his forehead. He rolled a boulder over the entrance, a stone so massive that 24 horses couldn't move it. They were trapped. His gaze fell upon the tiny men. His booming voice echoed in the cave. "Who are you?" Odysseus, thinking quickly, spoke of their shipwreck and pleaded for hospitality in the name of Zeus, the protector of guests. The Cyclops laughed, a terrible, rumbling sound. He cared nothing for the gods, and to prove it, he snatched 2 of Odysseus's men and ate them. The horror in the cave was absolute. There was nothing they could do but watch in silent terror. Morning came, and the Cyclops devoured 2 more men for his breakfast, before leaving to tend his flock. Rolling the great stone back into place, Odysseus was left in despair. He could kill the giant in his sleep, but then they would be trapped forever behind the immovable stone. He needed a plan. And a plan began to form in his clever mind. He found the Cyclops' club, a massive log of green olive wood, as large as the mast of a ship. He and his men sharpened the tip, hardening it in the fire. That evening, when Polyphemus returned and ate 2 more men, Odysseus approached him, offering him the strong, unwatered wine. The giant, who had only ever drunk milk, was delighted. He drank bowl after bowl. "What is your name, little man?" the drunken giant slurred. "Hi, my name," Odysseus replied, "is Nobody. Fine." "A fine gift for you, Nobody," the Cyclops roared with laughter. "I will eat you last of all." And with that, he fell into a deep, drunken slumber. Now was the time. Odysseus and his men heated the stake's point in the fire until it glowed red. Then, with all their might, they plunged it into the giant's single eye. The name of Polyphemus shook the very foundations of the mountain. He tore the stake from his eye and flailed blindly in the darkness. The other Cyclopes on the island heard his cries and gathered outside the cave. "What is wrong, Polyphemus? Is someone trying to kill you?" they shouted. "Nobody is killing me," he roared back in agony. "Nobody is killing me by treachery." Hearing this, the other giants shrugged and walked away. "If nobody is harming you," they muttered, "then it must be a sickness from the gods. We cannot help you." Odysseus's clever trick had worked, that they were still trapped. At dawn, the blind and whimpering giant rolled the stone away to let his sheep out to pasture. He sat at the entrance, running his massive hands over the back of each sheep, ensuring no man could escape among them. But Odysseus had one last trick. He tied each of his men to the underside of 3 large, woolly rams. He himself clung to the thick fleece of the finest ram of all. As the sheep passed out of the cave, the giant's hands felt only their woolly backs. They were free. Once back at his ship, Odysseus's pride got the better of him. He could not resist shouting a final taunt to the blinded giant on the shore. "If anyone asks who blinded you, tell them it was Odysseus, son of Laertes, from Ithaca." It was a foolish boast. Polyphemus, hearing the name, let out a final roar of fury and prayed to his father, Poseidon, god of the seas. He prayed that Odysseus would never reach home, or if he did, that he would arrive late, alone, in a stranger's ship, and find a world of pain awaiting him. And Poseidon heard his son's prayer. The sea, once a path to home, now became Odysseus's greatest enemy. The curse had begun. For a time, it seemed their luck had changed. They came to the floating island of Aeolia, home to Aeolus, the keeper of the winds. He hosted Odysseus for a month, listening to his tales of Troy. As a parting gift, Aeolus gave him a large ox-hide bag, tightly bound with a silver cord. Inside were all the winds of the world, except for the gentle west wind, which he set free to blow their ships straight towards Ithaca. For 9 days and 9 nights they sailed, with Odysseus himself at the helm, never sleeping. On the 10th day he could see it, the shores of Ithaca. He could see the smoke rising from the hearths of his home. He was so close. Overcome with exhaustion, he finally allowed himself to sleep. It was then that the crew's jealousy and greed took over. They had seen the heavy bag Aeolus gave Odysseus, and they whispered amongst themselves that it was full of gold and silver. While their king slept, they untied the silver cord. Instantly all the winds of the world burst forth in a chaotic, howling tempest. The hurricane seized their ships and threw them back across the sea, all the way back to the island of Aeolus. Their hope, once so close they could almost taste it, was ripped away. When Odysseus pleaded with Aeolus for help again, the wind god turned him away in horror, believing him to be a man cursed and hated by the gods. They were forced to leave, rowing with their own strength, their hearts heavy with despair. Their journey grew darker still. They rowed for 6 days and came to the land of the Laestrygonians, a race of giant cannibals. The harbor was a perfect, tranquil cove, surrounded by steep cliffs with only a narrow channel leading to the sea. All the ships but Odysseus's own sailed deep into the cove to anchor. Wary, Odysseus kept his ship outside the harbor entrance. It was an unnatural quiet. Suddenly, giants, tall as mountains, appeared on the cliffs above. They began to hurl massive boulders down upon the fleet trapped in the harbor below. The sound was of splintering wood and screaming men. The giants speared the sailors like fish and carried them off to be eaten. It was a massacre. Only Odysseus's ship, anchored outside the trap, was able to cut its cables and escape the horrifying scene, leaving the rest of his fleet and his men behind. His 12 ships were now only one. Broken and grieving, they sailed on, and eventually came to the island of Aeaea. This island seemed different. It was quiet, wooded. In the center of the island, Odysseus saw smoke rising from a chimney. He sent a party of men to investigate. They found a palace in a clearing, and strangely, roaming its grounds were wolves and lions. But these beasts did not attack. They were unnervingly tame, fawning over the men like house pets. Inside the palace, the men could hear a beautiful voice singing. It was the sorceress, Circe. She invited them in, and all but their cautious leader, Eurylochus, entered. She gave them a meal of cheese and barley, mixed with a honeyed wine. But the wine was laced with one of her potions. As soon as they had finished, she tapped them with her wand, and they were transformed into pigs. They had the bodies and bristles of swine, but inside, their minds were still human, filled with horror and shame. Eurylochus ran back to the ship in a panic. Odysseus, ever brave, decided he must go alone to save his men. On his way, he was met by the god Hermes, who gave him a magical herb, the moly, to protect him from Circe's magic. Hermes instructed him on what to do. When Odysseus met the beautiful Circe, she offered him the same drugged wine. He drank it, but the moly protected him. The potion had no effect. When she tried to strike him with her wand, he drew his sword, as Hermes had instructed. Circe fell to her knees in shock and fear. She knew he must be the prophesied Odysseus. He made her swear a solemn oath not to harm him and to free his men. She agreed, and with an antidote, she turned the pigs back into men, younger and more handsome than before. Circe proved to be a generous host, and they stayed on her island for a full year, resting and recovering. But the call of home was too strong to ignore forever. When Odysseus finally told Circe they must leave, she did not stop him, but she told him his journey was not yet over. To find his way home, he first had to travel to a place no living mortal wished to go. He had to journey to the edge of the world and descend into the land of the dead. The journey to the Underworld was one of fear and shadow. Odysseus and his men sailed to the dark land of the Cimmerians, shrouded in perpetual mist. There, he performed the rites Circe had taught him, and the spirits of the dead began to gather like shadows. He spoke with the blind prophet Tiresias, who foretold the rest of his difficult journey. The prophet warned him of the deadly sirens, of the twin horrors Scylla and Charybdis, and above all, warned him not to touch the sacred cattle of the sun god Helios. Break that one rule, the prophet warned, and his ship and crew would be destroyed. Odysseus also spoke with the spirit of his own mother, who had died of a broken heart, believing him lost. He saw old comrades from Troy, and their tales were filled with sorrow. The experience was harrowing, but it gave him the knowledge he needed. He now knew the path and its dangers. He returned to Circe's island one last time, and she gave him final, practical advice. For the sirens, whose beautiful song lures sailors to their death on the rocks, she advised him to plug his crew's ears with beeswax. If he wished to hear the song himself, he must have his men tie him tightly to the mast of the ship. He followed her advice. As they sailed past the Sirens' Island, Odysseus alone heard their song. It was a melody of pure ecstasy, promising knowledge, power, and an end to all suffering. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. And he screamed and fought against his bonds, desperate to go to them. But his loyal men only tightened the ropes, and they sailed safely past. Next, they had to navigate a narrow strait between two great perils. On one side was Charybdis, a monstrous whirlpool that sucked down the sea 3 times a day. On the other was Scylla, a 6-headed monster who lived in a cliffside cave, snatching sailors from the decks of passing ships. Circe had warned him there was no way to fight Scylla. He had to choose to sail closer to her and accept the loss. As he steered the ship away from the terrifying whirlpool of Charybdis, the 6 heads of Scylla darted down, and with horrifying shrieks, snatched 6 of his best men from the deck. Odysseus could hear their screams as they were lifted into the air. He said it was the most pitiful thing he had ever seen. Finally, they reached Thrinacia, the island of the sun god Helios. Here grazed the god's sacred cattle, beautiful and immortal. Odysseus, remembering the prophecies, made his men swear a solemn oath not to touch them. But unfavorable winds trapped them on the island for a month. Their food ran out. They were starving, reduced to eating fish and seabirds. One day, while Odysseus was away praying, his second in command, Eurylochus, made a fateful speech. He argued that it was better to die at sea from a god's wrath and to waste away from starvation. The crew, mad with hunger, agreed. They slaughtered the best of the cattle and made a sacrifice to the gods. When Odysseus returned, he knew they were doomed. The sun god Helios was enraged and demanded justice from Zeus. As soon as they set sail, Zeus sent a terrible storm. A bolt of lightning shattered their ship, and all the men were thrown into the churning sea. Every last one of them drowned. Only Odysseus survived, clinging to a piece of the broken mast. He drifted alone on the vast, empty sea for 9 days. On the 10th day, he washed ashore on an island that seemed like a paradise. It was Ogygia, the home of the beautiful nymph Calypso. And so the great wanderer was home. The man who had faced giants and sorceresses, who had sailed to the land of the dead, who had tricked gods and monsters, was finally at rest in his own bed, in his own home, with his family by his side. His long, cursed voyage was over. His story reminds us that no matter how long the storm rages, no matter how far we are blown off course, the longing for home, for peace, for love, satisfaction, is a light that can guide us through the darkest of nights. Now, as the tale of Odysseus comes to its peaceful end, let your own journey for tonight come to a peaceful end as well. Let the last echoes of the story fade away, leaving only the gentle sound of the waves, rocking you, soothing you, carrying you into a deep and restful sleep. Sleep now, sleep well.